Hello everyone. Welcome back to the lecture series of Emergence of Bangladesh. In our last class, we focused on the early days of British India, where we also talked about the impacts of British rule in India. This is lecture number 3, part 1. In this part, we will focus on the reforms done by British India and how those reforms left important impacts in Indian society and how India started growing up with nationalism gradually. So let's begin.
In this lecture, we will talk about the following topics one by one. The topic points are early reforms and repercussion, early resistance movements, the First Indian War of Independence, the establishment of Crown Rule, later resistance movements, the social reforms in British India, understanding nationalism in British India, Indian National Congress, and Mahatma Gandhi. In history, we witnessed a lot of reformative initiatives brought by British. Some of them positively impacted on Indian society and helped grow in a sense, but at the same time gruesomely attacked on some inbuilt traditions. Some reforms had negatively impacted on the system. Inconsistent and the repressive policies often sparked rebellions against the colonial rulers. For instance, dual systems and its plunder provoked the Fakir-Sannyasi Resistance. The core objectives of the most of the reforms were to serve British administration or to rationalize their rule. The permanent settlement of 1793 paved the way for the transformation from royalty with responsibility to business proprietorship with unchecked profiteering without any responsibility, which served the British directly and through their local agent jamindars. But disastrous change in proprietorship happened as peasants lost the ownership of the land forever. This jamindari system sustained whole of the British rule until it was abolished in the Pakistan period. As a result of this ill-motivated land reform system, currents of peasant movements prevailed throughout the rule of British colonial power in India. On the other hand, Education Act of 1835 brought a sustainable and revolutionary change in favor of British colonial rule in India. After the inception of Western education, English became the official language instead of Persian. Modernization started to take place in all the sectors. Like new education system helped to end the monopoly of Muslim Qazi or judge in the judicial system. Instead, a new system of judiciary introduced. Hindus wholeheartedly received that change and started getting English education. Muslims were still staying aloof, which pushed them backward. Whatever the impacts of British education policy, unlike to other colonial policy, the main objective was to serve their administration. Thomas Macaulay truly states the aim of Western education in the following statement, where he said, "The aim of Western education was to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions who we govern, a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Well, there were other reforms like doctrine of lapse. Let's move on to it now. Doctrine of lapse was introduced in 1848 by Lord Dalhousie, which caused several and severe unrests in various parts of India. In contradiction to the previous terms with British, adoption of sons by rulers in the absence of their natural heirs was banned in the princely states. This law gave the British a pretext to annex those states, such as Punjab was annexed in 1849 and Jhansi state was annexed in 1854. Doctrine of lapse instigated the local ruling elites to initiate many movements, such as Sepoy movement or First War of Independence. These were only few examples. There were many other changes, reforms, policies which shook the Indian society and sparked plethora of anti-colonial movements. We are now going to talk about some of the notable early resistance movements against the British rule in India. These movements were vital because they were the first to mobilize the people, especially in Bengal, against the wealth-hungry British rulers. It is important to note that because of the inconsistent and repressive policies, rebellion had been common phenomena for the British rulers. Several resistance movements had been organized against British colonial rule in India because of different actors and factors. Fakir-Sannyasi Resistance, Tariq-e-Muhammadiyya movement led by Titumir, Faraizi Movement, Indigo Resistance movement, Santal Rebellion are the most notables and significant. So, the very well-known early resistance movement is Fakir-Sannyasi Resistance movement. Reasons and the results of this movement were deep-rooted in the then society of Bengal. The leaders of this movement were Fakir Majnu Shah and Bhavani Pathak. Impact of dual system and recession and depopulation due to the Great Bengal Famine of 1770, which you have already learned from the previous class, had already caused havoc in the peaceful society of Bengal. Amidst the hapless situation of people, a new repression had been disturbing the societies. Consulted by the Jamindars, British government, in an ill-advised move, banned the collection of arms, treating the fakirs and sannyasis as looters. It agitated the fakirs and sannyasis, the Muslim and Hindu religious men, against the government. Thus, the first notable anti-colonial resistance movement waved the country. In 1771, 150 saints were killed, which made the movement more violent. Their movements combined sporadic attacks engaging the British all over Bengal and Bihar from early 1760s to early 1790s. The impacts of the movement were huge. Importantly, it exerted the dormant determination of the people to fight for their community rights against alien rulers. Fakir-Sannyasi resistance became an inspiration for later anti-colonial resistances. The famine of 1770 and Fakir-Sannyasi resistance had been portrayed in the Bengali novel Anandamot, written by Indian first modern novelist Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. The song Vande Mataram, which was written in 1876 was used in the book Ananda Mott in 1882, and that song later became the main slogan of Indian nationalism. We will talk about the Indian nationalism later on. Another resistance movement which we are going to talk about is known as Tariqa-e-Muhammadiyya movement. Most of you might know the leader of this movement. His name was Mir Nisar Ali, popularly known as Tito Mir. He was influenced by the thoughts of Sayyid Ahmad. After coming back to the country from Hajj, Tito Mir started this puritanical movement in Bengal. Because of its reformist nature, it eventually turned to be the expression of the grievances of the peasants against British rule and their local agent Jamandars. As it was a movement of peasant class, the followers of Titumir were mainly peasants. At that time, oppression reached at a level that Jamandars even imposed taxes on beards of Muslims. The oppression by Hindu Jamandars and indigo planters pushed Titumir and his followers to revolt. They refused to pay taxes and heroically fought the oppressors and made this movement a nightmare, especially for the local Jamandars. Titumir even built a makeshift bamboo-made fort named Bashar Kella in Narkelbaria. It is no surprise that the movement could not make its way against the British government. Titumir's resistance uprising was crushed by powerful British East India Company forces with the support of local Jamandars. The movement was defeated, but like the previous one, it inspired later movements. Moving on to the history of the resistance movements, now I'm going to talk about the Faraizi movement. This movement spread all over Greater Faridpur region and the adjacent areas. A local religious leader, Haji Shariatullah, basically started this as a puritanical movement. It had close relationship with the peasants. You know how the puritanical movement of Titumir headed the grievances of peasants and turned to be a revolt against oppression. Thus, Haji Shariatullah and his Faraizi movement emerged out as a peasant rebellion against the local Jamandars, indigo planters, and their British masters. It became more widespread based on Eastern Bengal and took the character of an agrarian revolt. After the death of Haji Shariatullah, his son Dudu Miah took the leadership of the movement. Under Dudu Miah, the movement got a more organized shape. The one most important result is that Faraizi movement worked as a forerunner of Muslim nationalism in India. So apart from the previous resistance, now we are going to talk about another important movement against British ruler in India. Indigo resistance movement is an early movement which is also known as Blue Mutiny. Indigo plantation helped to grow a predominantly European capitalist entrepreneur class in British India. Although later turned as unstable, the only reason why small peasants cultivated indigo was the money came in advance. Huge demand in Europe made the indigo cultivation highly profitable at that time. But the problem is that the indigo market was acutely vulnerable to the fluctuation in the capitalist world economy. For example, the economic depression in England left the entrepreneurs and farmers totally helpless. Cultivators faced brutal oppression and exploitation by the entrepreneurs. both European and Jamindars. As you know, they are also the local agents of British imperialists. The Blue Mutiny of 1859–60, supported by the middle class, overthrew the system of exploitation by a large rebellion. Many sympathetic missionaries, critique and praise, and Neel Dorpon, a drama written by Dinbandhu Mitra in 1860, helped grow consciousness and public opinion. The Blue Mutiny of 1859–60, supported by the middle class, overthrew the system of exploitation by a large rebellion. The British government formed Indigo Commission in 1860 and made indigo cultivation flexible. So it was one of the successful anti-British movement with instant results. Even if we search, we can easily find abundant indigo factories in different parts of Bangladesh, as they are still standing as witness of exploitation and oppression against the people of this land. Santal Rebellion or Santal Hul was a tribal movement. It is the most famous tribal resistance during British period. This uprising was led by tribal leader Sidhu and Kanu, widespread in Jharkhand. After British government destroyed forest lands for cultivation, Santal got that opportunity on those lands, but under the permanent settlement, those lands were also given to the Jamindars. It was very common that those Jamindar landlords imposed land revenue burden on Santals. Moneylenders under British patronage created huge burdens on the local indigenous people. The British and the Indian moneylenders were considered by Santals as Dikhu or foreigners who grabbed the tribal lands. Santals started agitation against the incursion of Dikhu, as land revenue of the East India Company crucially affected the village economy. Santals began to be exploited by usury practices and exploited economy on the other hand. Santal rebels, with the help of local peasant, resisted the oppressive rule accused of their dire situation. Unfortunately, powerful English rulers, with the help of their local feudal chiefs, suppressed the rebellion. This rebellion also left behind a legacy of peasant resistance.
That's all about the early reforms and resistances under British rule. In our next segment, we will discuss the first war of independence in India, which took place during 1857.